Let's talk about national security now. And national security actually has a chapter in our constitution. Chapter 14, national security, and Article 238 says, the national security is the protection against internal and external threats to Kenya's territorial integrity and sovereignty, its people, their rights, freedoms, property, peace, stability, and prosperity, and other national interests. It goes on now to talk about how the national security of Kenya shall be promoted in accordance with the principles of 1, it's subject to the authority of the Constitution, it shall be pursued in compliance with the law, in performing their functions and exercising their powers. National security organs shall respect the diverse culture of the communities within Kenya, and recruitment to the by the national security organs shall reflect the diversity of the Kenyan people in equitable proportions, and so on and so forth. With us for the next conversation is the National Security Advisor to the President, Ambassador Dr. Monica Juma. Good morning.
Good morning, Latif.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning. There's a lot that we do not know about national security, and we hope by the end of this 50 minutes or so, we shall get to understand a bit of national security. But first, Janet is going to welcome you with the day's quote.
So the quote today is by Nelson Mandela. Actually, it is on safety and security. And in 1999, he said, "Safety and security do not just happen. They are the result of collective consensus and public investment." What's your response to that? What comes to mind when you hear that quote?
Well, first of all, Janet, thank you very much. It's been a while since I was on air, so I'm definitely pleased to be here. That quote kind of provides the broader context of what security entails. Security is not just boots on the ground, it's not just soldiers. And that is why Article 238 gives a broader view of what security entails. In fact, the best way to look at it is that it is from a human perspective. And so you will hear some people talk about human security. It's about the provision of public safety and security. It's about the provision of opportunities to realize full potential. It's about the possibility of growing our prosperity as a nation together. So it is the entirety that guarantees 1, safety, 2, opportunity, 3, guarantee for sustainable growth.
Human-centered.
It is.
Yeah, human-centered security.
Let's start with your office and what it does. Just basics to understand, because I think, kuna ka gap knowledge. There's a gap knowledge.
Well, no, not really.
With us.
Yeah. Well, the 2010 Constitution envisions a new structure of governance. And in that Constitution, Kenyans bestowed upon themselves democratic credentials, that we are a democracy that will be governed by constitutionalism and the rule of law. And the fundamental principle there is that our security is subject to civilian oversight and control. That is the basic principle. And from the 2010 Constitution, there has been efforts to give effect to that Constitution. And this administration, as part of that, there has been a very intentional effort to give institutional structure to the executive office of the president as part of the constitutional imperative. And so the Office of the National Security Advisor is part of that. And it sits with 2 main functions. First, it is the Secretary to the National Security Council, which is the institution envisaged in the Constitution to really elaborate on the security and to guarantee, a view of this national security that provides for the sustainability of our nation as a republic, but our nation as the welfare of the citizens of this country. And so the vision of the ONSA, as we say, is to ensure that we guarantee the welfare of the citizens and the well-being of the republic, to just give it the holistic definition of security as I provided it. The second role is to offer advise to the president on the parameters of national security. And again, the parameters, as I've set them up here. And so we are constantly looking at the trends and dynamics that would impact on that definition, on that language that Latif drew from 238.1. What are the threats to our homeland, to the territorial integrity, to the sovereignty of the people? What are the threats to the rights, the freedoms, the prosperity and things like that? So it's a whole breadth of things. And all the time we are trying as much as possible with my staffers to trend, to look at the trends, to look at the risks, to identify the opportunities, and to provide views about how to orchestrate the range of national elements of power in order that we can achieve that.
I have a concern here, though, madam, that as you've described, you offer advice to the president, the presidency, and also you serve as giving secretarial support to the National Security Council. That's not anchored in law, though.
It is.
Which particular, because I remember a piece of legislation going to Parliament and Parliament saying no. So which law now provides for the Office of the National Security Advisor to sit in the National Security Council?
Well, not to sit in the National Security Council. There is provision that the National Security Council will appoint its secretary. Yeah. So that is anchored in the Constitution. So there is no inconsistency there. And I think the importance of what I said is really the essence of institutionalizing, again, going back, so that you do not have a situation where you have offices that are existing by discretion. Yeah. So the question is, within the 2010 Constitution, how is the presidency envisioned? How do you make sure that the presidency functions effectively? And that is the essence of it.
Of the office, okay.
Yeah.
I'll quote the part of the Constitution that actually she's mentioned. Article 240 establishes the National Security Council and lists the members. Then 245 says the council shall appoint its secretary.
Absolutely.
It doesn't say how.
Well, but that is given there. Okay. What are you looking for?
It's in the how, because if we don't institutionalize, like you're just saying.
Well, but even the fact that it elaborates, that it directs the appointing of a secretariat, it is not discretionary. It means there is an office that is charged with making sure that the council runs effectively.
An office or a person. I get what Eric is saying.
Well, the thing is, if you're going to
structure that says the secretariat shall be appointed like this, like that, by this and that body, person, etc. Just that the National Security Council shall.
Yes, and shall is not a discretion.
Yes, it's mandatory.
Yeah, yes, it's not a discretion. Number two, if we agree that the scope of that work looks at the entirety of the nation and its essence, then in fact this is not a role that you can just give to a person. It is very important that it's structured and that you can actually provide for the office that executes this mandate to the seriousness that it serves.
Yeah, you see why I'm pushing for the institutionalization.
Yeah.
Each of these offices that are in the National Security Council,
correct,
is answerable to an oversight of Parliament, for instance.
Correct.
The President, the Chair, the Deputy President, the CS for Defense, the CS for Foreign Affairs, the CS for Internal Security, the Attorney General, the Chief of Defense Forces, the Director General of NIS, and the Inspector General of the National Police Service.
Correct.
Each of them individually answers to Parliament in whatever
or to the
capacity
National
they
Police
serve.
Service Commission.
Right? Yeah. And they are answerable to it. Now, the Secretary, who's the Secretary answerable to?
To the Council.
And beyond that?
And the Council is answerable to the people. So there's no gap. There's absolutely no gap.
You're still seeing a gap?
Absolutely no gap.
We'll continue the conversation. Let's
yes.
go to the next
I wanted to ask, as we hold, I know Mariam and Erica, I think I'm picking up this headline. It was earlier this year, 6 Kenyan police reservists were killed in Garissa, right? It was earlier this year. The reason I'm bringing that is a lot of Kenyans, I think of security as like the guns and the boots, like the hardware. National security, what else does it inform beyond that hardware? And what kind of, I guess I've gone straight to threats, do we now need to be aware of that you can share publicly? That is not, but yeah, beyond the hardware, what does national security entail?
Well, as I've just elaborated, and from your Nelson Mandela, site, which is very good, national security is the totality, of risks, threats, but even vulnerabilities, okay? Because it is from vulnerabilities that if you don't deal with those, then they kind of metastasize to real threats. So something, that begins like, somewhat an uncomfortable situation, if not dealt with, could actually grow into a serious threat. And there are a number of examples to this. And so it's not just the boots. Yeah. Ordinarily, really, the boots come in at the last point because there's a whole range of elements of power, resources that we need to deploy. For example, right now, one of the emerging vulnerability is related to the rain patterns, rain patterns. Yeah, so we are having erratic rains today, and some regions are having more than usual rains. And so we are beginning to see landslides, displacement of people, which means they will not have their production cycle will be disrupted, their farming, their what. So this can have significant impact on the food basket. Just to link it quickly. This can mean that we have a crisis in the drier areas between farmers and herders, which could actually escalate. It might mean that you'd have animals that begin to die of lack of water, of lack of food. So, and what are the measures? Some of the measures that are required at this point going forward are very kind of non-security measures, if you see what I mean. For example, encouraging livestock farmers to destock when the animals are still able to accrue proper returns, better returns, rather than losing the animals and losing the income. And, beginning to stockpile, whether it is for hay, whether it is for foodstuffs, for human beings or things like that, beginning to provide water provisions, beginning to encourage movement and negotiation between communities to allow for access to resources. Now, all these things are, the police and whoever else is very, very far off. But if we don't follow them in a timely manner, then that vulnerability translates into a risk and actually can translate into a threat where we now have to start deploying police.
Just before you come in, the other question I wanted to ask based on that is, are there reforms or new reforms underway to protect frontline officers? And I ask that because there seems to be a vulnerability, I stand to be corrected, when these attacks occur often over and over again. You have spoken to that there's a whole chain of events that happen before the boots come in. But even the boots seem vulnerable, especially when it comes to, broader national security matters, border security matters. Are there reforms needed to better protect frontline officers? Is that something that's been worked on?
First of all, let me say that our police and our security sector as a whole do a lot of work that is very rarely recognized or appreciated. And I think sometimes taken for granted, People just don't quite appreciate how much happens for us to have a night rest, and to go to our clubs for young people and get home. I mean, there are places where these things don't happen, and it should be that way. If we have the right things, it should be that way. So I want, first of all, to express the gratitude of Kenyans and of those of us who are sitting in some of those positions to our security forces, because they are doing very difficult work. That having been said, the nature of threat in terms of security threat is also changing, in terms of even the domains of those security, even the type of threats that is coming upon not just our own people, but also the security forces themselves, as you're saying, Janet. And so that is why the security sector is constantly in training, is constantly in exercises to try and match up the changing nature of the threat scenarios, and that means also they come upon threats themselves, even individual threats. And so it is about continuous training, continuous practice, continuous understanding of what the terrain, the environment looks like. So it is true that our forces sometimes come upon threats, but all the time, and that is what the forces, the services have to do to make sure as much as possible within the framework of the resources available that you can prepare your forces to the best of their ability to protect them, this nation, and to also remain secure so that they can do their jobs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I wanted to go into regional security, Kenya's place in regional security, how diplomacy, and securing other regions benefits us as a nation. And then also the fact that in recent times we've seen, I would say, a lack of respect for Kenyan citizens abroad. And I'll use, for example, the case of the abduction of Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyo. Kenyan citizens as well being killed in Tanzania during the post-election chaos and seeming cover-ups. The abduction of Kenyan human rights defenders again in Tanzania. What does that do for our national security as well? That lack of respect, for lack of a better word. But let's begin with regional security, Kenya's part and diplomacy's part, and what it does for us. And then now, when our neighbors don't respect us, where is the problem? And what does it do for our security?
Well, two very big questions, Two very big questions, but let me attempt them. First, our own prosperity and destiny is inextricably linked to our neighborhood, and that is why we have a history of focusing our attention to the neighborhood, because we are a middle country, 50 million, our aspirations are big. You could not realize those aspirations within the context of our geography and our population. But also, we realize the potential of that neighborhood if we went in sync, because that neighborhood is our market, that neighborhood is our theater for our culture, that theater, it's our theater for our own people moving out there and so forth. So that is why within our diplomacy, in history, we've had the region, the neighborhood, as a critical plank in that diplomacy, in that engagement. And also, I think there is a duty of care. We happen to be geographically located in a very favorable place. Out of Nairobi, you can reach our neighborhood within 1.5 hours. Everywhere, whether you're talking from the Seychelles all the way back into Dar es Salaam. You can reach probably the rest of the continent, each point of the continent in 5 hours, and it moves on. So our geographic location also provides, bestows upon us a responsibility to act as an anchor, whether it is in terms of diplomacy or in terms of trade. And in order for this to function, for us to achieve the prosperity, the promised prosperity from this region, it's very important that it is stable and it is peaceful. And this explains, because oftentimes you hear people saying, why are we so interested? Why are you wasting so much money? Why is the president moving around so much? We have to engage, because if we don't, then our backyard will not support our own aspirations. And so when we are talking even of national interest, a peaceful neighborhood is our national interest. So in fact, when we engage with the region, it's because we are seeking to secure our own interests for the nation, for the stability of the republic, but also for our people's prosperity, so that they can seek the opportunities that exist in that neighborhood. So this explains why we have been involved in Somalia, why we are keen to make sure DR Congo is okay, South Sudan, and so forth and so forth. And because of this clarity, we've always been seen, and because of the credentials that we have, we've always been somewhat a point of reference a really point of reference. And a lot of times we have people coming to say, how do you do this? How does this happen? And if Kenya does this, then it means we can actually, there is a way forward to it. So there is almost a duty of care, that we exercise around the region. And I think it should be like that. So you'll continue seeing us engaged. You probably know that the president will be part of the witness to the signing of the agreement on the DR Congo in the next few days. So this is why we must be involved, because our own stability, our own national interests are guaranteed if we are in a safe, peaceful, stable neighborhood.
We're coming up to a break. It's coming up to 8:30. So we are speaking with National Security Advisor, Dr. Monica Juma, just to talk about security, diplomacy, power, and Kenya's regional role. We'll come back and continue the conversation in just a moment.
We're back in conversation with Ambassador Daktari Monica. And there was a question that we left hanging just before the break, which was, what does it do for our national security when our neighbors don't respect us? And I give examples of the abductions of Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyo, the abductions of, again, Boniface Mwangi, Agatha Tuhaire, although she's Ugandan, but let me just use Boniface Mwangi in Tanzania, the killing of Kenyan citizens in Tanzania, and the apparent cover-ups therein. And basically that regional, lack of, what would I call it, respect for the rule of law. So what does it do for our security when our neighbors clearly don't respect us? And let me add a little pinch in there. They seem to be taking a leaf from the way we treat our citizens internally. I don't think in a pre-public abduction Kenya that the Tanzanian and Ugandan governments would have done these things, but they've seen that it's okay because it happens at home, so they can do it abroad and almost cooperate in this weird way.
Well, Miriam, I think Mariam, that's a good question, but I think its interpretation is not entirely right. The citizens are the reason governments exist. So it is important that the security of the citizen is a priority. And that is defined even within the definition of what constitutes the core national interest of this country. Now, the commitment to that, particularly for our citizens abroad, is manifest for this administration. Among us, the first State Department created by President William Ruto was the Department for Diaspora, essentially to focus attention on Kenyans abroad, because the president realized that there is a growing number of people, Kenyans, that are living, and are living, are working, are living, are going to school abroad, and that there was need to focus attention on their needs and their welfare when they are abroad. So, and I have to say that State Department, in my view, is doing a great job. Starting from the ground, ensuring that Kenyans have the right documentation, they have access to services and so forth, and that when they get into distress, there is a call. There's a number you can call, and there will be somebody at the end of that number. Now, you will know, because this has happened publicly, that there has been numbers of Kenyans that have been in distress and that have been recovered from outside. So I don't think we should look at this as if it's a one-way thing. Are there distress cases that have had challenges? Yes. Is it good for, first of all, Kenyans to have difficulties in the neighborhood? No. And part of that, there's a lot of conversations, there's a lot of mechanisms that are being established, public and not public, to ensure that we secure Kenyans. Now, one of the things that we urge, and this was always a challenge, even when I was serving in the MFA. For a long time, Kenyans were very unsure about, making contact even to the Kenyan missions abroad. It took us a long time to just say, the government is there for you. and people almost felt, you when you've gone out, you're on your own, you don't need your government and you don't need whatever. But I think more and more people understand that those missions we have there are supposed to serve you. It is important that Kenyans, like other nations, are known when they arrive in foreign territories. It's very, very, very important. So that somebody sitting in the State Department of Diaspora doesn't just know there is somebody at that corner of the country because there's duress. Because these days something can happen. You can have an earthquake. We just had an earthquake in Ethiopia, just the other day. Did we have a Kenyan around there? I don't know, but it would be very helpful if we already have that kind of information with us. So there is no joy in hearing a message about a Kenyan in distress, about a Kenyan abducted, about a Kenyan arrested, and that is why we have consular officers in every mission in our embassies, to make sure that a Kenyan who is in those circumstances is accessed, is processed appropriately, properly, in dignity, and with the full respect to their rights, both to themselves and to the country. Because as you say, Kenyans kind of feel, are people darawing us or something like this, but it is important that we retain good relations, both at government level, but also at people-to-people level.
There's a clip of, before you go into it, there's a clip of President Museveni speaking about Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyo. Phil, let's play it because we... Oh, okay.
We don't have that particular clip, but we know in this particular instances, Ambassador, what you're saying is there are Kenyans who've been in distress in countries because of other factors. Where war breaks out in Sudan, and there are Kenyans in Sudan, and the government of Kenya works to try and bring them back home. Then there are Kenyans who are in distress.
And that has happened.
Yes. Even as recently as Myanmar and Russia. Then there are cases where Kenyans are in distress because of the actions of those governments. So, for example, Kenyan in distress in Tanzania because they've been arrested by the authorities in Tanzania or the authorities in Uganda, and they stay, out of public eye for a long time. What, in such instances, that it raises tensions between the two countries and between the peoples, what is our national security stance on such?
Right. Well, the protection of Kenyans is a priority. It's the first priority. And if a Kenyan is arrested, and that's why I'm saying the consular officers in the missions, this is their task. It is the first task. And there is not a Kenyan that I'm aware of, for example. Well, I know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs follows this very closely. Once that information is relayed, there's a whole range, there's a system, there's a whole modus operandi for dealing with it, So a lot of work goes on. It's not necessarily public, but there is a lot of work that goes on when a Kenyan is in distress, whether they are perceived to have committed a crime or not. That is the second layer of issues.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there a role for communication to the public and particularly to the families? So, for instance, when Boniface Mwangi is arrested in Tanzania and the family in Kenya is not getting any information from the government of Kenya, or Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyo are kidnapped and abducted in Uganda, and the family is not aware of what's going on, what's the place of communication in such cases?
Well, first of all, communication in all cases such as those is to the family. It is not public necessarily, yeah. And as I have said, there is a whole series of actions that are supposed to be taken. It involves another jurisdiction. We even have treaties and agreement on how to treat issues that are dealing with the law enforcement and things like that. So there's a whole series of things. Now, is there a role for communication? And the two cases that you're really illustrating with were public cases, So there was a lot of energy around them for a whole range of reasons, So the manner of and the media was involved and all sorts of things. And this also, I have to say, I think it is also very important the motivation that is driving some of the reporting, some of the communication, some of the disinformation that goes around with high-profile stories like this war. So I think you have to understand that within the context of the nature of the case. These are not the only 3 people that were in custody at any one time, by the way. So we have a lot of Kenyans that are having brushes with the law. It's not just in Tanzania, in other countries as well. So I think every case, you know, you'd have to talk of every case on its own merit because of its character.
What's UNSA's protocol in that? And then I know we're pressing on this, and just allow us to. There's obviously a state of nervousness around one's safety and security, and that's not even to sound alarmist.
Yeah.
Right now in Tanzania, like we've said, we don't quite even understand the scope of what's happened or happening to Kenyans there. So number one is, what is UNSA's protocol and your role as advisor in everything you've described? And then number two, again, is it within your role or a mandate or that of somebody else in security to put aside our fears? Because there is fear. There's concern around our safety in our neighboring countries, of activists coming here, etc. Isn't there a role to stand up and say, listen, this is where we stand, this is how we're looking out for our people, this is what should happen in future, this is the protocol that we're following? I think that's what we mean by communication. Otherwise, it's just guesswork and alarm.
Well,
so
well, first of all, as I have said, there's a number of institutions that are mandated to do specific things. In this case, when a Kenyan is in a foreign country, MFA is the front mandate, yeah? And I think even in the case of Uganda recently, you've seen, I mean, there's been a lot of movement. You've seen the PCS in Uganda, you know, having some meetings. And there's a lot of conversations on the entire neighborhood, really. It's not just a question of Tanzania. We have Kenyans in South Sudan that we watch carefully. We have Kenyans in Sudan up to even now, and things like that. So this is ongoing, you know, and I think what I can say, while it is MFA that does this all the time, is that from where I sit, the Constitution secures the security of every Kenyan citizen as a sovereign, you know, as a sovereign of this citizen, whether you are in country or outside of the country. So the effort is really to deploy every means to make sure. And it's not just physical security. Some of it is even investment of Kenyans. You know, how do you protect Kenyan investment? And it doesn't, from small investment to huge investment. So it's a whole range of actions and efforts to try and secure that entirety of Kenyan well-being, their prosperity. And we are also thinking about this in relation to also the neighboring citizens that are in Kenya. So that it doesn't get to a point where Kenyans feel that, you know, our people in Tanzania, you know, are insecure. Why should we have Tanzanians here? Because that just escalates. You remember what I talked about, vulnerabilities. If you don't deal with them, then they begin to escalate into greater risks and threats. So it's not just the Kenyans there. You're also saying, what measures do we need in place to make sure that you promote better relations and good neighborliness, because it is good for both sides.
How do you do that in a region such as this? So if you look at what's happening regionally, and like you said, Kenya's role in making sure that there is a peace and harmonious coexistence among all these nations, but also at the same time, there are actors in those countries who feel that Kenya could be interfering. In the case of Sudan, for example, Kenya has been playing a role under the auspices of IGAD, but there are some players in the Sudan conflict who feel that Kenya is not doing the right thing. In the case, for example, of Tanzania recently, what we are seeing political rhetoric from the leadership of Tanzania seems to be pointing a finger at Kenya. You know, kuna watu walitoka kwa nchi jirani, kuna watu ambao ni majirani. Hizi vurugu zimetoka kwa jirani, nchi jirani, and you can clearly feel as if they're talking about Kenya. That could escalate into something. What are you currently doing
Well, I mean, Latif, I've said there's a lot of things going on. Some of them are not probably for this table. But I think what I can say, and first of all, we are not the only jirani of Tanzania. So if you say, if Tanzanians are saying kutoka kwa jirani, why should Kenyans apportion themselves the jirani alone? Tanzania has probably 7 jiranis. Huh? So I don't think we should. That's why is it you?
It's us.
So I think the media has a big role to tell Kenyans there is more jiranis than ourselves. So we shouldn't feel as if we are the only ones, that if there's a finger pointing that it is in our direction. And I think generally speaking, Tanzanian people feel the camaraderie and the brotherliness and the sisterliness of ourselves, as we do of Tanzanians, and it is important that we also try to communicate to our people not to get weaponized by whether it is political expediency or whatever expediency it is. And this is the case, for example, for what you are saying for the Sudan. I mean, the position of Kenya, as you probably know, and this has been restated by the president variously, is that the Sudanese people have a right to self-determine the structure of democratic governance they want, and that a war between 2 generals is actually a subversion of that aspiration. And because of that, we are open, as we have been historically, to provide a basis for Sudanese to have a space where people can talk. That has been done openly. The president has been very open around it. Now, would that be amenable? Would that be something acceptable to somebody who wishes to end this matter in the battlefront? I don't know. I don't think so. And if that is the case, you would expect that they would say, you are not on my side and therefore you're not my friend, or something like this. But having said that, I can tell you that there has been engagement even with those sections of the Sudanese society, because our view has been, a stable Sudan is good for Kenya. And it is good for us because we worry, from where I sit, for example, when I see the patterns in terms of terror threats within our region, into the Sahel region, it becomes a real something to make everybody sit upright, because any act that is going to be an act of terror threat to us would actually threaten our own survival now and the aspirations for our prosperity for the future.
Okay, I'm going to make a statement. Feel free to agree or disagree. The biggest threat to Kenya's national security is its political leadership. It's what enables insecurity within, whether it's from a perspective of abductions within, killings within, and then that now trickles outside. It's what enables these diplomatic faux pas that look like that also put us in, tricky waters with our neighbors. It's also what enables the gunification of our elections that puts Kenyan civilians at risk. Our politics and our politicians are the biggest threat to our national security. True?
Well, you can't answer that question in true or not true, but suffice to say that it's a big generalization that I don't think would explain the reality on the ground. There is a whole range of circumstances that can portend threat to our nation, but there are also a whole range of opportunities that can mitigate those vulnerabilities. And I think what we need to do as a country is to focus on that which minimizes risk to us as a nation and to us as a people.
How do you minimize the risk without assessing it?
We assess it all the time.
Assessing it objectively, naming it, and then minimizing. Figuring out how to minimize.
First of all, there's an assumption that we don't assess and that we are not objective. Both wrong. Both wrong. We, as I started to say here in the morning, and we are not the only institution that is trending risks and trends, by the way. Every institution does that. What we do is to have a look at the whole thing and see what is the implication of the right to the left and so forth. So there is a constant process of assessment, scenario building, what is capable, what are we capable of doing even within our means, because in fact it is not true that we have everything to deal with all the threats and risks. That there's no country, there's no people that does that. So all the time there's an act of balancing that we are dealing with at all times. So there are many risks, there are many opportunities.
And many acts of balance. I have a question around what the next frontier looks like for national security advisors. And I'm linking that a little bit with, say, the next generation and mentoring the next generation. I'm wondering whether there's an opportunity that you're saying, listen, this is what I've done as Dr. Monica Juma, but I do believe that there's certain things that the next generation needs to come with when it comes to addressing matters of national security. I don't know if that makes sense.
Lots of things. Okay. I mean, and one of the biggest opportunities and threats is our demographic profile. You know, our demographic profile, we have a young population, educated, okay, ready to mobilize and willing to do so. The channeling of that has the opportunity to actually create a momentum for positive growth for our country. Now, if we decide that this is going to be around mobilizing for innovation, for positive actions, as opposed to we are going to engage in disinformation, in attacking, in destroying, in doing what? I mean, and that is the fork where we are. So if you think, for example, globally, we are told by 2040, every probably 3 or 4 workers in 5 are going to be Africans. Therein lies the opportunity. We are having a young people that we can get ready for that market, both in Kenya, but in the neighborhood, which is why our diplomacy matters, those relationships matter, so that we can create the right frameworks to absorb our youth beyond of ourselves. Because as I said in the beginning, we are a small country and we cannot contain this potential within this country. In this case, therefore, activities even at an individual level around preparation of this youth, mentoring, getting them skill ready, getting them ready for the market, and also improving their perception and relationship with the other people. Yes, that is extremely important because you're not just going to up and assume things will happen for you. So I think there's a whole opportunity and everybody has a duty, including the media, in terms of framing, helping to frame the right story. This nation, we are obviously have become a hub for international multilateralism. The UN is expanding in Nairobi. It's the only global south. What is the meaning of that? I mean, the world is having confidence in Kenya. We need to be buoyant. We need to message that in terms of us being an anchorage, not just for the region, but an anchorage for the globe. So I think there are opportunities, and all these opportunities are the pathways that our young people ought to be part of. And of course, technology. I mean, we are a fast mover in terms of innovation and things like that. But I think the challenge is to sustain that lead role, that vanguard role, both for ourselves but also for the region in terms of framing and defining what technology looks like, because it is going to be the defining path for human development.
Okay.
And as we end the conversation, I know we're talking about mentorship. We see mentorship in various forms, various people coming together and saying, we are taking over just mentoring young people. And yourself as well, with your foundation, you have had a mentorship program, the Athena mentorship program for the last 5 years. Is there room for such to be, put together into a structure where people growing up know I can choose one of the mentorship paths to follow and apply and just follow that path?
It should. And I think part of it also, I think it needs to be scaled. So it shouldn't just be one place. I think it really should be scaled so that there is a range of options for young people, but also so that we can get the impact. You know, in terms of just the changes that are taking place today globally, they are taking place at such a speed. So we need to scale this. So I would also encourage each one of you here to take mentorship, and I hope you do, seriously, to try and structure it and to try and scale it, because we need to do that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Monica Juma, National Security Advisor, talking things security, diplomacy, power, and Kenya's regional role. In the next hour, we ask, where was the youth vote when it came to the by-elections? Ken Babu, who's the youth chair for the United Opposition, will come and tell us why the youth vote seemed to be missing and what this says ahead of 2027. It's coming up to 9 a.m.